Buenas tardes, Your Excellencies, Minister Lord Goldsmith and Regional Ambassador Fiona Claudia, welcome to Uniandes. Welcome everybody. Esteemed members of the diplomatic mission of the United Kingdom in Colombia, dear colleagues, professors and students from Universidad de los Andes, dear panel members, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Universidad de los Andes. As Director of International Affairs, it is my pleasure to welcome you all here today. We are honored to have Minister Lord Goldsmith as our special guest in Uniandes, and would like to express our gratitude to the British Embassy in Colombia for inviting us to organize this joint event. Before we continue, I would like to remind you all that this event is being recorded and live streamed via the YouTube channels of the University and the British Embassy. Si alguien necesita traducción simultánea, por favor nos solicitan los audífonos. Atrás los pueden ayudar. Now I would like to present you the agenda for today. We will begin with opening remarks from our Vice President of Research and Creation, Dr. Silvia Restrepo, and from the Minister for the Pacific and the Environment of the United Kingdom, Lord Salk Goldsmith. Then we will continue with the discussion panel on the impact and future of the UK International Climate Finance Clean Growth Programs in Colombia, followed by some questions from our audience. Finally, we will hear the closing remarks from the COP26 Regional Ambassador to Latin America and the Caribbean, Fiona Claudia. Without further delay, I would like to give the floor to our Vice President for Research and Creation at Uniandes, Dr. Silvia Restrepo.
Thank you, Catalina. Your Excellencies, Minister Lord Goldsmith and Regional Ambassador Fiona Claudia, thank you for being here. Dear members of the British Embassy in Colombia, dear professors and students, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Colombia, despite contributing less than 0.5% of the greenhouse gases that cause climate change, is one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts generated by this global phenomenon. These changes in climate patterns that generate drought, floods, loss of biodiversity, and changes in agriculture tend to affect more acutely the most vulnerable populations settled in territories with greater vulnerability. In addition, more than 50% of the country's current exports depend on sectors that might be less relevant in the climate transition, such as coal and hydrocarbons. This means that our country needs to make a greater effort for a systematic, fair, and equitable transition to a zero-emission economy. But these major challenges also open doors to important opportunities, such as planning for a more sustainable and equitable development, generating incentives and lifting barriers to the circular economy, tapping into the opportunities of electromobility and sustainable cities, leveraging these transformations in sustainable finance initiatives that are growing in the region, and creating a more sustainable and equitable economy for all. In the face of these great challenges and opportunities, it is necessary that the academia and the public and private sectors work together in the frame of international cooperation. The United Kingdom is one of our top partners in this regard. 18% of our international articles are published in co-authorship with UK partners. Around 80 full-time professors at Uniandes are alumni of British universities and keep very strong collaboration ties in different projects and initiatives. It is key that we continue fostering collaboration endeavors and partnerships between our researchers in all areas of knowledge. In this line, UK programs such as the Global Challenges Research Fund, the Newton Caldas Fund, and of course, the UK Pact program, among others, have been catalysts for these high-impact partnerships. We hope that we can continue seizing and increasing these opportunities for collaboration. Today, we are accompanied here in person and online by several implementing partners from different institutions with projects that are generating contributions for sustainable livelihoods, green finance, sustainable mobility, policy for sustainability, among others. At Universidad de los Andes, we participate in 3 UK Pact projects with active participation and contributions from the academia, the private sector, the government, and international allies. These projects are low-carbon cities in Colombia, an integrated urban modeling approach for policy analysis, Zero towards a low-emission road freight transport sector, and third, preparing the public and private sector for climate transition risk. An important feature of UK Pact is that it finances the creation of new knowledge, and this allows the generation of fundamental transformation that lasts over time. We hope that today's event can highlight the importance and the impact of the UK-Colombia partnership for sustainable growth and brings new ideas and motivation for continuing improving our collaboration efforts for a more sustainable future. I wish you a very successful event here at Universidad de los Andes, and again, a very warm welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia, for your opening remarks. Next, I would like to welcome on stage His Excellency Minister Lord Goldsmith.
Muchas gracias y muy buenos días a todas y todos. It is a real pleasure to be here, and I want to start by thanking the Universidad de los Andes for organizing this very important event. My name is Zach Goldsmith. I'm a minister in the UK government with responsibility for international environmental issues, climate change, and so on. And the purpose of my being here in Colombia now, just 20 days or so before the UK hosts the all-important climate COP in Glasgow, is to find ways to ratchet up ambition. Because we know that right now the gap between where we are collectively, governments around the world, and where we need to be to adequately address what is undoubtedly a climate and biodiversity crisis is too big, and that gap needs to be closed. And although we are seeing now some really exciting commitments from countries and companies in the run-up to COP, commitments around net zero, increasing number of countries joining that movement, net zero, companies signing up to race to zero, commitments from high coal-consuming areas of the world to move beyond coal, and so on. In terms of nature, we've seen much less progress, and we know that we cannot achieve net zero, we cannot stay within 1.5 degrees unless we hugely increase our efforts to protect and restore nature on a really an unprecedented scale. And that's one of the many, many reasons why Colombia is just so important. This country is blessed with the most extraordinary natural assets. And as the Vice President said earlier, Colombia has contributed very little to the problem that we are obliged to address as the world comes together for COP, a tiny percentage of the overall contribution in terms of emissions. But nevertheless, Colombia is a world leader when it comes to stepping up with commitments and policies, particularly around nature. The recently revised nationally determined contribution went further than most people outside of Colombia anticipated, with more ambition, in particular in relation to efforts to protect and restore the natural world, in particular forests. So Colombia speaks on the world stage with tremendous moral authority. And so as I've come here to Colombia, it's not to ask this country for many things, although of course I'm asking for a few things. It's really to work out how the UK can build upon what is already a very strong partnership between our two countries, so that between us, we can use that partnership to encourage other countries to step up and increase their ambition. And as we approach COP, one of the challenges we have is to increase and boost the profile of nature in the climate change, I guess the politics of climate change, that we know that we can't get to net zero without nature, and yet of all global climate finance, only about 3% is invested in nature. So as presidents of COP, one of our overriding ambitions is to ensure that nature is at the heart of our response to climate change, both domestically but also internationally. So we committed in the UK to doubling our international climate finance, a commitment we made about a year ago. And more recently, we've committed that nearly a third of that will be invested in nature-based solutions like forests, mangroves, seagrasses, and so on. And on the back of our commitment, we're trying to encourage other donor countries to do the same. But it goes far beyond public finance, of course, and perhaps with the panel we can discuss a little bit of what the world really needs to do if it's to close that gap that I described earlier. But as part of our financial commitment, one of the really exciting things is the ability it gives us to expand upon the partnerships we have here in Colombia. And I was really proud that the climate partnership that Colombia has with the UK is, if not the biggest, one of the biggest partnerships we have, amounting to nearly £250 million of international climate finance funding that is managed between our embassy here, our post, and a number of organizations, some government and some not. But I really look forward to discussing what the world needs to do if we're going to close that gap. It's wonderful to be here with so many experts, and I'm sure the discussion will yield many, many valuable ideas. But thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to your ideas and perhaps a few questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Lord Goldsmith. It is a pleasure for us having you here today. Now we can begin our discussion panel on the impact and future of the UK International Climate Finance Clean Growth Programs in Colombia. For this, I would like to invite our panelists to join us in our stage. Mr. Graham Knigth, Head of Economic Climate and Science at the British Embassy of Colombia, and who will be the moderator of the panel. Please join us upstairs. Ms. Wendy Arenas, Director of Alisos. Yes. Ms. Claudia Martinez, Director of E3. Thank you. Mr. Luis Alberto Camargo, Director, OpePA. Thank you. And Mr. Clemente del Valle, Director of the Regional Center for Sustainable Finances at Universidad de los Andes. So, Mr. Knigth, the floor is yours, and I will ask to have an additional chair for Lord Goldsmith. Thank you. Yes.
Lord Goldsmith, you sit here, and I'll steal this chair over here.
Yes.
Please. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And good afternoon to everyone that can see us on social media. We've got such a panel of expertise up here that we've prepared two very difficult questions for you to guide the conversation. And then once that's finished, we're going to open up to questions from the audience. Just one thing I'm going to try and do is turn this into a bit of a conversation. We've had some excellent events during the minister's visit, but I think what the audience would welcome and benefit from is a conversation, if we can. So I hope you've had your Colombian coffee, because these two questions are quite challenging, but we do have some expert brains up here. Chocolate, well that does have caffeine in, so fantastic. So our first question is, in a post-COVID context, what do you see are the main sustainable finance opportunities to scale up investments and job creation for the most vulnerable in Colombia and globally? I'll give you a few seconds to think. And who would like to open? Perhaps Minister, if you have some comments. There's a microphone there.
I'm probably the least qualified, but I'll go first. In a sense, it's not, I mean, we know that there is a need for really huge amounts of finance to flow if we're to put nature on a path to recovery, if we're to ensure that there are sustainable livelihoods for people, without which we can't have any sustainability. But it doesn't necessarily require new finance. So for me, the best opportunity is about redirecting existing finance. And part of that is land use subsidies. If you think the top 50 food-producing countries spend around $700 billion every year subsidizing often destructive land use, if that were to be shifted away from destruction and towards sustainability and renewal, that would potentially flip the market globally in favor of sustainability. It's not new money, it's just spending money less foolishly. And that's something that I hope more and more countries will commit to doing. But in addition to that, we know that corporations, that businesses, are feeling more and more pressure, just like politicians are, from consumers, from customers. And they know they're going to have to, at some point, clean up their supply chains. And so there's a huge opportunity, therefore, for sustainable production. When companies needing to remove deforestation, for example, from their supply chains, have to find producers who are producing in a way that is genuinely sustainable. So we'll see money also flowing. Now, I don't say that should just happen in the private sector. Governments need to set the rules, need to create the incentives, need to make that transition happen much more quickly than it otherwise would, but it will happen. So there are lots of opportunities. Of course, there are many other examples, but I would say those are the two most exciting finance opportunities, if you like, for sustainability.
Thank you, Minister. Please.
Well, thank you. I think one of the biggest challenges are long-term finance. We've seen in the past year a lot of finance coming in small amounts of many projects in very short time, financing 1 or 2 year programs. And we know that transitions and transformations need to be done in the long term. And if you want to do profound transformations, not just greenwashing, you need to accompany processes at least 5 years to 10 years. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're investing and putting the seed, but not helping it grow. And it's coming up to a point where you stop and think it's how beneficial could be financing projects for 1 year or 2 years. That's one of the biggest, I think, challenges we have here is starting to have really long-term commitments. The other big challenge, I believe, that needs to be addressed is countries, as the minister has said, that we have the nature. We have not only because the planet has given us the forest, but because it has been decision from the people of Colombia to protect large sum of forest, and that has been consciously policies that need to be compensated internationally. And if the world makes a true, sincere, ambitious commitment, is sending a very powerful messages to us and to everyone. And so I do believe that the finance should start also incorporated, as you said, Minister, it's the business model. It's the corporations. I think governments and of course civil society are working well, but I think we need to go even further in changing the model that we consider. That model of the market really needs to be more ambitious in changing the whole paradigm behind it, the DNA. Otherwise, what we will be doing is a lot of wonderful small efforts that are not going to be enough.
Claudia, who's very passionate about land use, I think wants to come in at this point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Graham and Minister. So nice to be here with you. I do believe, as Wendy just said, that long-term finance is needed. But for that, we also need to do blended finance. I mean, we need to bridge the private sector, and we need to use the scarce resources that we have as grants and concessional lending to enlarge the financing of the country, and we're not doing that. Obviously, for that, we need accurate projects, and we need to have sort of a platform of project design. Because obviously the financiers are in need of looking for good projects, and then the projects are looking for financiers, and we need to bridge them. And for that, we need to scale sort of platforms of accurate project designs. I'm part of the ITAP of the Green Climate Fund, for example, and whenever I revise the projects, I see there's scope for innovation in project design, in project development. And obviously, as you said, Minister, like the AFOLU sector is really crucial for a country like Colombia. Like, we often see projects in the transport sector, in the energy sector even, but you know, the AFOLU sector is there to be sort of the keen sort of sector, and there's very little innovation in the way we're seeing nature-based solutions. So I think there we need to put a lot of resources in both capacity building, innovation, science and technology, and sort of bridge the gap between financiers and obviously project design. I think, for example, here at the university, how to support students to design good projects, how to drive innovation, how to use science and technology for that would be one of my key points. And obviously, I do agree with the minister in terms of subsidies. I mean, if we use the subsidies accurately, and we do blended finance with that, we could enlarge the sort of the portfolio of available resources and finance to bridge the gap. So I would put those two in the conversation.
Fantastic, thank you. And perhaps Clemente from the university might come in.
No, well, obviously the ladies have provided a lot of excellent ideas, not that much left, but just to follow up a little bit on the opportunities, I think there is an enormous amount of opportunities that private or public sector really do not fully understand and fully know. And that's why I think knowledge and research is so important in this work, because I interact a lot with companies here, private sector companies who want to do things, but sometimes they are not completely sure exactly where to start. And I think that the possibility of, and that's where the academia can play an important role, but it has to be an academia that does applied research in some way. It has to really connect with the private sector and understand what are their challenges and how can they really help them. And one of them is transforming their business. I mean, we want to do the same but different. We want to do it cleaner. We want to do it more socially acceptable. And that requires sometimes technology. Sometimes it's just changes in process. But you need to help on that. And that's why what this program has been doing to support research and capacity building is so important, because it helps in that direction. And then the other side, the financing side, I come from that world. I was there for 35 years doing mobilization of resources for many purposes. And the last one was mobilizing money for infrastructure. And we used blending in a very successful way. We were able to mobilize $15 billion of money coming from banks, from capital markets, from many sources. But the government was smart in using the limited resources they had in addressing risks. Some of the risks that the bank doesn't want to provide to a project. And that could be projects related to land use, it can be projects related to circular economy. Sometimes there is new technologies, they're afraid of it. So what governments can do is being smart and addressing some of those concerns and using some of those subsidies or those resources to address some of those concerns, and that will untap a lot of funding coming from traditional sources. Traditional sources are very conservative, unfortunately. And we also need to educate them to see that the opportunities are there, that the risk may not be that large, but still the government may need to provide incentives, whether in regulation or through some sort of risk mitigation mechanisms, you know. And I think that's where these kind of programs can be so helpful.
Thank you. I have a question for the minister. I'm just going to give you forewarning, Minister, about how we're incorporating that long-term approach into UK international climate finance. But Luis.
Thank you. I want to start saying that I totally agree with Wendy and Claudia in that, you know, long-term is an important factor. We need to really finance cultural transitions, and financing cultural transitions do not happen in 1 year. And I would even say 10 years is a short period of time for the transition we need to actually have in the world. And in that sense, I'm not an expert in finance, but I reflect a lot on the impact of finance. And I think when we realize or question what value means, this is one of the key questions, I think, or what return of investment means to anyone in the financial sector is fundamental. Because if nature starts, collapsing like it is now, those two words have no meaning. All of the investment we're doing is based on stability of natural systems. So we have to really understand and start bringing a message that connects the health of the planet with actually the health of any economic system that we have in place and the health of human systems. In that sense, I think we need to finance a couple of specific areas. One is weaving for cross-sector climate action. I think we're still very stuck, especially in Colombia, in a polarization and fragmentation of both governmental institutions and actors in territories. So we're having big difficulties in creating traction in collective action. So I think weaving and generating conversations that create common objectives, common visions is going to be very fundamental. Additionally, being able to finance sustainable community projects. I think this is something key for Colombia. Colombia is a territory that is very diverse, not only in nature or biodiversity. It's diverse in cultures, in territories, in geographies, but each little niche of combination between nature, culture, people, and territory really needs a specific solution that has to be woven by all the actors in those territories. So I think the top-down approach of financing to bring to the territories is not showing fruits. We need to really finance to have solutions emerge from territories, and this is one. And my last idea is that, and agreeing with Claudia in that a follow sector is fundamental for Colombia. Right now, even though in our project we're working energy and transport, which is fundamental for large cities in some areas of Colombia, over 60% of the country is a follow. That's where the emissions lie. But that's also where the mechanisms of production are created. So I think that's, those territories need to be a priority in looking at how to apply nature-based solutions focus that is really connecting more than just production systems and chain and let's say supply chains, but thinking in what I would call regenerative corridors. And for me, regenerative corridors has to do with weaving, because we need to weave conservation with corporations, with governments, and all the actors to create corridors in the territories where conservation and protected areas are connected with really good pieces of land in restorative function or restoration that are connected with a transition in how we produce into agroecological systems and other systems that actually enhance restoration and guarantee conservation. So as long as we build these regenerative corridors and invest in those, the value and the return that we will have is going to flourish, because that's where a lot of our economy comes from.
Thank you. Thank you. Minister, maybe if you want to reflect on those, and perhaps a question from me. We've touched on the idea of a long-term approach, and we know at UNGA a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister announced a new tranche of funding for UK Pact, and the UK is committed to doubling our international climate finance. From your perspective, how are we incorporating that long-term approach into our commitments?
So, I mean, look, it's crucial, obviously. The market is a very powerful thing. We know that, but the market on its own is not going to deliver sustainability. We need to, we're going to reconcile our economies, our lives, etc., with the natural world on which, obviously, we each and every one of us depend. That requires really deep systemic change and a new set of rules. It's been calculated, don't ask me how, that the incentives to destroy forests are 40 times greater than the incentives to protect forests. So you can have as many projects here and there doing great stuff as you like. If you don't change the structure of the system, then we're always going to be playing catch up. So whatever we do, we need to be trying to encourage governments, because governments do, they do things that governments can do that no one else can do. And they can create the parameters, write the rules, use the tax system, use the regulatory system to inform the market, if you like, of the value of valuable things and the cost of things like pollution, waste, and plunder. And without that kind of intervention, it's going to be very difficult. So the money that we have put aside, that the Prime Minister announced at UNGA, it was actually 2 years ago at UNGA, he announced that we double our climate finance, and then last UNGA he announced a significant contribution to the UK Pact. No matter how much money the UK or other donor countries commit, it's not going to be enough. So we have to try and use that money as leverage. We have to use that money to make investments by the private sector less risky, more attractive. And I think that's the thread that runs through PACT. I've just come from Peru. I was only there, unfortunately, for 2 days. But I saw a project there which the UK has been very closely involved in a sense. It's about providing the bridge that you described earlier, where we have helped to matchmake a drinks company with a local community, with a commitment from the company that it would buy the produce from the community on the condition that the production was sustainable, that the trees are not cut down, that the forests are maintained. And I had the huge honor and privilege of visiting that community, and it seemed to me, not just on paper, but in reality, to be almost a perfect solution. And in terms of investment by the UK, it was a very tiny sum. I mean, really a tiny sum. It was much more about that matchmaking, about bringing the company to the community. And the UK Pact will be doing a lot of that. And that is a very exciting program, and a lot of good will come of it. But at the same time, I think the systemic changes are absolutely unavoidable if we're going to get to a point where we're living more or less within the means of the planet on which we all, as I say, depend.
Well, perhaps an extremely interesting perspective, and perhaps this second question will provide us with a counterpoint. And we've got representatives from civil society and academia with us here today. I'd be interested to know what people's perspective is on the role of civil society and academic institutions in helping Colombia meet the ambitious targets that we talk a lot about, particularly around achieving carbon neutrality. So from your perspective, what is the role of academics and the role of civil society? Please.
Yes. Many of my years of experience has been working in civil society and NGOs. And as the minister just said, there's not one sole actor that can do it by itself. It needs to be done with all key actors, and civil society play a key role. It's that part of the society that is not the bridge, how do you call it in Finch, is the Finch. Because we have our mission and our vision is the public good, but we're much more flexible. We are closer than the government can ever be to communities, to what is happening on the ground. We do have a vision, a long-term vision, and I think we play a key role in sustaining and maintaining policies and actions that go beyond governments. So we are a long-term actor that needs to play a key role with government, with the private sector, and empowering civil society, even in a national level, local levels, is critical to assure that whatever solutions or transformations are happening can also be maintained and sustained through actors that are absolutely natural leaders and champions on the ground. And I think the possibility of innovation also comes from civil society. There is that possibility that civil society puts together, because it's very much in close contact with the problems, with the solutions that come bottom down. And I think it's not just having people bottom up or bottom down. We need to make that civil society and communities do participate in the decision-making processes of where finances go. Because sometimes when we're sitting here in Bogota, as we say, that's typical, when we're sitting here in Bogota, we think we know the country, but the country is much more different and diverse. And imagine you sitting in London. Well, of course you know the world, but coming down here will give us a difference. So open up the space and the possibility of dialogue between civil society and the biggest changes and the biggest finances and the biggest transformations and even the biggest goals that we need and challenges that we need to meet would be, I think it's critical.
Fantastic, thank you.
And in COP26, I hope civil society has a big role.
First, again?
Please.
Okay. Now, I think we have to sort of support coalitions for change, and I think we have to have sort of a theories of change of landscapes and territories. And for that, we need to sort of bridge communities, bridge, educators, governments, private sector, all the actors that sort of believe and, are looking forward to having a better future. And that happens at the territorial level. So I think we have to go deep into the territories. I agree with Wendy. We also have to sort of think about communication and sort of what changes behavioral change. Because that's the other thing. I mean, when we speak about sort of, the Food System Summit, the Glasgow COP, and whatever, there are very few of us who understand what is happening in the world. And we really need to sort of bridge that down to the community level and also sort of take the communication from real regenerators in the field, real actors in the field, who are the heroes. They're really the heroes. They live there. They're regenerating cultures and societies. They're sort of, if we could support them in sort of scaling up their models, that would be awesome, no? And I just want to put, for example, a project of the UK Pact here, which is, for example, the tourist routes for forest and peace that we're developing with support of the UK Pact, which is amazing. We're working in these two territories in Quinchas and Perijá, Quinchas in Boyacá and Perijá in Cesar. Very incredible territories. They have lived through conflict. They have incredible biodiversity. And we're working there with the communities to sort of develop this theory of change with them. And through the tourism sort of scheme, we're supporting them in social cohesion. We brought the Kew Botanic Gardens to teach them about their rich biodiversity, but they're also learning from them about, traditional knowledge. We're bridging, for example, chefs, culinary chefs, to sort of support the communities in analyzing what they eat from their own biodiversity and how could they do this amazing gastronomy based on their traditions. We're sort of really sort of bridging them also to do homestays and to really take care of their future. And I think there, the support from the UK Pact and others are crucial, and I do agree, is at the territorial level. There, that's magical. We just sort of sent the first tourists to these two landscapes, and they came back saying exactly what you're saying, Wendy. I think we finally understood the country. Thank you for allowing us to understand. We're scared of going to those territories because we always hear about them. And now that we see the communities, how they're forging their future, there is where we're making the bridge.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll give the gentleman on the panel a couple of minutes, and then I might throw it open for questions to our audience.
I'll take the edge of the academia side. I mean, I think the academia can also play the same kind of role than civil society too. One is to conglomerate, to really bring people together around a particular agenda, and I think that is something that the academia has to have a bigger and bigger role on that. And also the credibility of the independence of views, that sometimes is also very important for this dialogue, between civil society, governments, private sector. And for example, around risks, I mean, we've talked about opportunities, but unfortunately, climate change brings a dimension which is risk. That is, unfortunately, something that is calling much more the attention of many people because they're finally understanding that this is real and this is going to affect the livelihood of many people. And we have a project with UK Pact, which is about building capacity among public sector and private sector, initially at the national level, but it's about the risk, risk of transition, which will affect, in this particular case, it will affect regions of the country that have heavily rely on products like coal. Coal, everybody wants to eliminate coal, but this is a country that doesn't use a lot of the coal here, but exports the coal. And there's a big part, 2 or 3 or 4 departments of this country that make their living out of that, not only directly in terms of employment, but in terms of the royalties that those states makes out of that. And they're worried, and they should be worried, because that's going to change. But by building capacity and building ways of helping the government and the private sector and the public, the regional authorities to see the way out. How can we change the business of those states? How can we change the opportunities those states have of substituting their reliance today on coal is key. And I feel that is the kind of capacity building that universities can play. We involve 6 universities from different regions. Our goal is in the next round really to bring this at a more regional level, bring these universities who are working closely in those communities to help the communities and the potential enterprises to develop in those regions to start looking at the opportunities early, because you don't want to suffer this 5 years, you need to start today to do that transition. And I think that's where the university can play that catalytic role of putting together different parties around a particular objective.
Thank you.
And I would finish because I think you guys have said so many excellent things, but I think, and I want to bring something Lord Goldsmith said at the beginning, nature has to be brought to the center. And I think this is fundamental, and it's fundamental in how we start changing narratives. So as has been said, we need to listen to the territories, we need to listen to the people, we also need to listen to the planet. So combining this local perspective with a planetary vision or a systemic perspective and being able to thread and connect those two, I think this is one of the roles civil society has, and especially in bringing that understanding and starting to work to change narratives. Changing narratives from conflict, from resistance, to narratives of collaboration and creation and construction of a new, or let's say a new emerging future. So I think civil society plays that hinge role that Wendy was saying in doing that, connecting ideas and bringing new ideas into the narratives. And in that sense, it's fundamental to bring in a living systems approach. And I think the new narratives that the world needs to create have to realize that nature is definitely at the center. And ultimately, we are nature. But we have created this idea that humans are in one place, nature is in another place, and we're in conflict because of that duality we have created in our narratives. So I think one very important role of civil society is to start accommodating to a holistic narrative that brings nature to the center.
Thank you. With that, I think we have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to open it up for questions before we ask Fiona, our COP ambassador, to close. Thank you. So let's do 2 questions together. The gentleman in the blue shirt, and then I think there was a hand up at the back. I can't quite see for the lights.
Well, thank you very much for all your input. It's really amazing to hear all of you, the different perspectives. I'm just wondering, how can you get to, all of you talked about communities and how to get there and how's the real Colombia. It's outside in the outskirts, not in the big cities. But how can you really empower those communities to generate that impact? Because, those are the nature keepers. If you manage to empower local communities, then you sort of ensure conservation and sort of ensure regeneration. Because they are the ones that know how to do that, but they lack empowerment and they lack sort of development in an economic growth perspective. So how can you really empower those communities based on some sort of climate change literacy, some sort of proper income, and some sort of how to scale up those nature-based solutions that they are already doing. And if you go Pacific, they do know how to handle mangroves, they do know how to handle fishing in a traditional and sustainable way, but they cannot scale that up. So you get into the industrial fishing, into the industrial mega projects. So how can you balance that and empower those communities and bring those nature-based solutions to the big cities and to the sustainable world?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And sorry, let's do the question at the back, and then we'll take both together.
Thanks to the panelists. I'm Diana Trujillo. I'm an associate professor here at the School of Management. And my question for you is, how do we speed up solutions? And this is because, like here at the university, I'm just going to mention, we have 4 amazing projects. We have a master's in regeneration and sustainable development. We have research on regenerative business models. We have 2 very nice projects with the National Natural Parks system. All of those projects have a huge potential to bring nature at the center of climate action. But then what I find, and this is because I'm involved in all of them, is that the coordination of actors, the massive educational effort we have to do with people, the intention of educating in practice, all those takes so much time that I find myself frustrated many, many times with the pace at which we can implement solutions. So I would really like to hear from your perspectives. How do we speed up solutions? Thank you.
Thank you. So how do we speed up solutions, and how do we empower the communities that have the real knowledge to make the change that we need to see?
Okay, so I can start by saying a couple of things. First of all, scaling up. For me, it's a concept that is not associated with the emerging future, because scaling up means making homogeneous a solution. And here we need to inspire people to actually bring their own solutions. And as you said, the territories have the solutions. When we speak to people and when we come into territories and listen, a lot of solutions emerge. But we need to start by listening, so that's the first thing. The second is, as we start working into bringing those solutions and the communities to get empowered, I think having conversations to find what is common. And this is something that we've found in several methodologies we work with. And when we start talking with let's say multi-sector actors of a territory and ask them how they envision their territory, how they would love to see it, you start realizing they all have a vision where people are, finding well-being in general. It's not a vision where people are finding money as their main goal. And when we anchor into well-being as the objective, territories start acting really quickly. There's an example with COVID from one of our colleagues in Costa Rica. As you know, Costa Rica is 84% tourism-based. They don't have any production within the country, very little. So as tourism stopped from one moment to the other, there was no food. But in the northern part of Costa Rica, people started listening. And then the transition of all the practices of production and coming into regenerative agriculture happened in less than 3 months. They already had food for everyone. In 9 months, they were feeding 90,000 people. So this, for me, is accelerating change. But it requires to listen and to have enabling conditions. In this case, the enabling condition was forced by COVID. But in regular moments, we need to generate enabling conditions with legislation, with government positions, with corporations. Those create enabling conditions, but we need to listen and empower people to work for their own well-being and build up cohesive solutions within each territory.
Thank you. Claudia, you look like you wanted to come in at this point.
No, I do agree with Luis. I dream of having sort of a network of regenerators, which actually we're forging one with Luis in Antioquia, for example. We find in Antioquia, for example, it's the size of Costa Rica. It's just a department in Colombia. We're so huge, Minister, no? And each one of them has a different model, but we're bringing them together in a laboratory for change to see how could they share knowledge, how could they scale their models, and how could they sort of use also institutions. So we're bringing the universities of Antioquia to that innovation lab. We're bringing the policymakers, the government as well, to learn and to scale. We're bringing the private sector. And so it's a combination of regenerators and institutions working together in forging solutions. And again, not to scale the same model, but to learn from each other. We need to have sort of, cooperation, and we need to have sort of knowledge sharing schemes. And obviously the other thing is that we're seeing that legislations go far on the other side. We still do sort of agricultural policies the same way we did them 30 years ago. No, we need to do policies including regeneration and involving communities. So it's a multiple sort of schemes of actions. And the last thing is how to do, for example, what we're doing with the UK Pact, again, which is the Climate Finance Accelerator. And so to accelerate these, we have to, again, bridge financiers and projects in a landscape where they could speak. And sort of obviously, because we need some sort of finance to scale these models, to bridge and to accelerate changes. So I think those are the points I would put to your questions.
Thank you.
Your question I agree completely with what Luis and Claudia have said. First of all, the obsession of upscaling. We need to reflect really profoundly on that, because what does upscaling mean? And is it going to be to do the same solution to the problem that probably needs different focuses? So, and we feel very much pressure about the upscaling, and we need to go furthermore and bigger scale, and what does it really mean for processes like the one that we are involved in and also engaged every day, and that's a big question. It's not something that I have the answer, but it's a big question. One of the issues that we believe, and we're applying it in the project that we're doing with UK Pact, which is Cacao para la Vida, Más Bosques para la Amazonía, which is the cocoa project on the Amazon basin, is the first thing, we're not working for beneficiaries. They are partners. We have to take that word away from our projects and the way we approach it. We are having partners. And once you never mention the word beneficiary, you have partner. You're on equal terms. We are giving something. They are giving a lot. And once they are treated as partners, it's a way of empowering. And I think that is critical for all the processes and projects that we're implemented. Actually, Santiago and the embassy, we never talk in our reports of beneficiaries in the UK Pact. We're talking of our partners at local level. So that's the first thing for us of empowering, looking at our partners and territories from a different perspective. The second issue is opening up those spaces, as Claudia has mentioned, with government, with private sector. That's very important. Opening the door so they become the real protagonist of the discussion is another way of empowering. And the last one is being with them in the long term. There's nothing worse than you start a program that is really powerful and you leave them alone. In a year, in 12 months, in 18 months. That is very disempowering, because we bring hope, we bring dreams, we bring ideas, and then, whoops, they're gone. So I think my reflection on that is also you empower people when you do believe they are powerful people.
Thank you. Did you want to come in at this point, Minister?
Just very, there's lots already been said, so I'm going to be very brief. But just 2 points. The first is that if you look at lands lived in, looked after by local communities and indigenous people, it's around 40% of the world's carbon is stored in those lands. It's nearly 50% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. And that's not a coincidence. So part of the challenge is not about rushing around intervening in communities. It's the opposite. It's about empowering communities who have been, for thousands of years in many cases, looking after the environment in a way that right now we can only dream of, and ensuring that they have the power, the strength, the legal status perhaps, to not be displaced, to not be marginalized, to not be messed around with by so many governments. And I just think there's, it's not that complicated. That is a part of it. And just in terms of the scaling up, I don't think scaling up means scaling up a homogeneous solution or a particular model and then imposing it all over the place on lots of diverse communities. It's about scaling up a shift, which we need to do. So you take, for example, in the UK, we introduced probably one of the first environmental legislation that I can think of was the Landfill Tax. Everyone has it, I think, now. Where for the first time, waste became a financial liability. And by making it a financial liability, every single local authority, every single business had to start finding ways to reduce the waste they were generating. Perhaps they didn't care about the waste, but they did care about the financial liability. So you scaled up the response to a waste crisis by creating a stimuli, but everyone did it in a different way. And in the UK at the moment, we're passing a law called the due diligence law, which will mean that businesses that import commodities, if they're big businesses, have to demonstrate that the commodities they're importing were not grown on illegally deforested land. Now, that's a stimuli, that's a rule effectively, or parameters that have been set by government. But that will lead to so many different types of responses around the world. So I think scaling up is critical, but it's not about homogeneity. It's not about imposing a single model on the world. It's about moving in a direction and trying to accelerate that movement so that it gives us a chance, at least, of having a future for future generations, frankly.
Thank you, Minister. Well, I might see if one more hand goes up. For one more question. I know we're supposed to finish in 1 minute, but let's try one more question, and then we'll invite Fiona up. So one question at the back.
Hi. We have talked mainly about the role of governments, the private and financial sector, academia, and other key stakeholders. Recently, we mentioned as well the strategic role that civil society has in that transition to a sustainable world. If you had to send a message to them in order to be involved and be part of the leadership related into the climate mitigation and adaptation actions, what would be that message you send to the civil society?
Did everyone catch that question? I think, yeah, Nico, would you mind just taking your mask off?
Thank you. So if you had to send a message to the civil society in order to be involved and be part of the leadership related into the climate mitigation and adaptation actions, what would be that message you send to them?
Who wants to start? Minister, and then perhaps Clemente, who didn't get a chance on the last one.
Not sure why I reached for the microphone, so I'm not sure I have a ready-made answer. I'm going to almost deliberately misinterpret your question. If there's one thing everyone can do, absolutely everyone, it is to be political. You don't have to stand for office, you don't have to be a member of parliament or Congress or council or whatever, but everyone can be political. And there are things that only government can do, and there are things that government must do, because the market on its own can't do it. And I think the one thing everyone, therefore, can and should do is to be political and pressure as much as they possibly can, whoever it is that's representing them, to get serious about these issues. And that can happen in a million different ways, but it has to happen. I think I'm going to leave it at that, actually. I know I misinterpreted your question, I apologize, but these guys will...
Still a very, very strong message.
Let me echo what you said. I'm not a politician, but I fully agree that a lot of our societies sometimes feel that being political is they don't like it or they don't want it. But we cannot change governments, we cannot change rules, we cannot change policies as long as the common person doesn't really get more committed to making their politicians to be accountable for that. We've been having a major problem of lack of accountability from our politicians. And that's why they're not generating the changes. And I think the consumer is the other one. I mean, the civil society, consumers are a very powerful force. And they can send, I mean, the more educated they are on what they can do, sending messages clearly to the companies, to the governments, of what they don't want and what they want. And we know that this transition is going to come largely because the consumers are starting to send the message, I'm not going to buy something that is destroying nature. And I think we need to empower that, and they need to empower politicians that understand that and are willing to go for that. And I think that's where that will be my message to civil society.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, because there's a responsibility as a citizen in terms of what policies are and the local, national, and global agendas. And there's a role for us as individuals and as citizens to demand, of course, a more serious and responsible accountability to our leaders. And I think we play, and we've seen it here in Colombia last year, and we've seen the power of people are going on the streets worldwide. It's a power of the people really manifesting and saying what they really think is important. So I do think that the agenda of climate change, the agenda of nature in the center is critical, and we all play a very important and key role. And I believe that we have to do it by heart, not only strategically, but consciously, believing that we have the force to demand a different future.
Thank you. Please.
Okay. I want to say that, you know, if we take any president in the world, when he steps out of his palace of ruling and goes home and is with his kids, he is the same as any of us with our kids, with a family, with all these circles of influence. But they all start with the human being, with that one person, that right now it's in a state of vulnerability because climate change and biodiversity collapse and all these issues are systemic planetary issues that will affect planetary health. So they will affect the individual health. So I think the message is civil society is actually all of us, because when we step out of our roles, we become civil society. We become one like anybody else. So as Wendy said, if we start acting with our heart from that role, organizations will change, families will change, communities will change, governments will change, because everything starts in that personal political action of assuming the role we have and protecting the lives we care about. So I think activating that individual power in all the circles of influence needs to happen. That would be my message.
Thank you. And no pressure, Claudia, the last word on the panel.
It's always difficult, but I think we only have one planet, and we have to live in it, you know? How are we going to fit 9 billion people in the next, 30 years, sort of conserving the planet? So please, get involved. First of all, get involved. Any sort of involvement with your community, with your government, with your family, get involved. Act. Start acting. It's not only to sort of go to the streets and sort of preach about what there needs to change or whatever. Act. There are small changes that every person can do, and make choices. Again, I think consumers have the power of making choices. So make choices. Whenever you eat anything, think about the potato you eat. It comes from a páramo in Colombia? What is happening with that páramo in Colombia? What is happening with the water? Really act, select, and make choices.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, on that note, firstly, I'd like to thank the university for giving this space today. I'd like to thank the minister, who has we've designed an extremely busy program for him in Colombia. So just finding the time to be with us this afternoon, it's great. And thank you to the the panelists, first for being here, and secondly for braving the traffic, which I imagine by the time we leave today will be the usual Bogota traffic. So thank you very much. It's a really interesting discussion, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And at that point, I think we're going to invite Fiona up to give some final remarks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to our panel participants, to our audience for these interesting insights. And to close our event, I'm glad to invite the COP26 Regional Ambassador to Latin America and the Caribbean, Fiona Claudia. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the University of Los Andes, to the panelists, to Lord Goldsmith, to my colleagues at the British Embassy for hosting this most interesting and stimulating event. And as the Minister said, we are just really 3 weeks away from COP26, this great conference that will take place in Glasgow, the 1st to the 12th of November, to bring the world together to try and make progress on these very important issues. And so today we've touched on COP, we've touched on Colombia, we've touched on some of the risks and opportunities from climate change. And we've also talked about that we're all in this together, and that really this is about people and about partnerships. So for COP, in bringing the world together, we're trying to move the world to a new place, and we need everybody to play their part in that. We've got 4 main objectives that we're taking forward: mitigation, to encourage countries to reduce their carbon emissions, and to also look at the opportunities coming from that, for example, from the energy transition, from the shift to clean transport. Secondly, we're focusing on adaptation and resilience, and that's where nature has got such an important role to play, because sadly we know climate change is happening, and that we need to help the most vulnerable communities and countries adapt to that, but we all need to learn from those experiences, build in resilience for the future. And that's where that nature-based solutions have such an important role to play, as the panel have been discussing this afternoon. And so we also need to mobilize finance, both getting the richer countries in the world to make good their previous commitments to increase international climate finance that helps fund important initiatives, such as we've been hearing about the great collaborations that have come out of the UK Pact funding. Also, though, it's about mobilizing the big financial institutions, the big multilateral development banks, and about mobilizing business, and changing the culture of business and forging new public-private partnerships. And then all of this is underpinned, of course, by the negotiations in the Paris Rule Book that are not going to be easy. But we all need to move this forward, and that's where we hope that Colombia, through its leaderships, through its visions, through the great examples, and also through the wonderful opportunities here on nature, that Colombia will help take some of those discussions forward. Because although Colombia is such a low emitter, it is, as has been said, a very vulnerable country to the impacts. It holds so much of the world's precious biodiversity, and we all need to understand that much more. So this is also an opportunity for Colombia to further raise its profile, show its leadership, and forge new partnerships on this important agenda. And so today we've also heard about how we need to think perhaps more creatively about the business models, about how we can all work together, how we use finance, how we stimulate markets, but also thinking about nature in that context. And there's been a very interesting review led by Professor Dasgupta that started to look at the economics of nature and biodiversity. And I think that's also another very interesting area of future collaboration with Colombia. And we've also covered the importance of academic research, of technology, of innovation, and also about a cultural transition. And really, I feel we talk about environment, we talk about climate change, we talk about protecting the planet, all of which is, of course, very, very important. But a lot of this is about social and economic change. And perhaps one thing this terrible last year of the pandemic has taught us all is this very important interconnection between nature, people, and the environment, and that perhaps we all need to learn to live and work together in different ways. And so it is about thinking about this in terms of people, in terms of communities, in terms of hearing, listening, and acting on the views of people that's very important. And it's also about the role all of us can play, whether in our organisations, in our governments, in our local communities, in our families. And so finally, I would just like to say what we all need to do is realise the urgency of the situation and act on that urgency. I think we're all very good at talking about the problems, but there is such a need to act quickly, act decisively, and also, as has been said, to hold governments and opinion formers and business to account on this very important agenda. And so perhaps the most important thing that COP26 can achieve is not just a conference where we all come together, important though that is, not just the negotiations, but it's the shift to urgent action that we hope that conference will encourage, and the onus is on all of us to make the most of that opportunity and to choose our future world, a better world, and better lives for everyone in it. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Claudia, thank you for your closing remarks. This marks the end of our event. We hope you have enjoyed this panel discussion and that we can all continue working together in developing solutions for a more sustainable and climate-resilient future. Before you leave, I would like to invite you to join us in the terrace in the 8th floor for a group picture. Thank you, and I wish you a pleasant evening.